Danny put out his hand. "Put her there, partner." "Pretty," Jan said, clasping Danny's hand. Standing in the wavering lamplight, they had a drink of old cordwood to seal the bargain. Danny walked down to the car with Jan. "Where shall I show up to the morning of the 4th?" he asked. "In the back harness room of Hodgkin's livery stable. Knock 3 times on the door. It's very secret, you know. Don't even tell your chums here. Mum's the bloody word, partner," Jan said, throwing his old Maxwell into gear and rattling away into the night. Old Danny stood looking down at the midnight blackness of the river. "Daniel in the lion's den," he mused aloud. $25, a brand-new pair of tennis shoes, and a live pig. He slapped his leg and chuckled to himself. "I wished my dear old mother could be here to see it." The 4th of July was a beautiful, cloudless day. That morning, shortly after 9 o'clock, the colorful floats began gathering in the big vacant lot next to St. Xavier's Church on South Main Street. The members of the local parade committee ran up and down in perspiring, straw-hatted hysteria. The Sons of St. Hubert's mystery float rumbled out of Hodgkin's livery stable, driven by Buller Bodine. For the occasion, Buller was wearing a tall fur hussar's hat and a red necktie. A large canvas tarpaulin completely covered the mystery float, beside which walked Jan Tregambo and 4 other watchful Sons of St. Hubert. Even Buller did not know precisely what he was hauling. He maneuvered the horses deftly through the milling sea of floats and contrived to get at the end of the entire parade. The mayor was finally helped up on his horse at the head of the parade. All was in readiness. The warning whistle blew. Souza and Pryor were joined in mortal combat, the 3 brass bands starting to play as many different selections simultaneously. The solemn Sons of St. Hubert quickly threw off the tarpaulin. At long last, the mystery float was unveiled to a waiting world. They were away. There stood Danny in the middle of a huge improvised cage made of chicken wire. Old Danny was clad only in his mangy wolfskin and the white tennis slippers. A wreath of ground pine rested slightly askew on his perspiring bald head. One skinny leg rested on a cardboard rock. Danny's thin, powerful arms were folded across his chest as he stood gazing up sightlessly at the skies over Chippewa. He stood imperturbable, like something carved out of the native granite hills. His immobile calm was broken only by the milling and spitting, the clawing and hissing of not 1, not 20, not 50, but surely all of the stray cats in Chippewa. Twin signs on either side of the dray announced to a startled world the significance of this deathless tableau. "Daniel in the lion's den," the legend proclaimed. Never before had the people of Chippewa beheld such a spectacle. A chorus of ahs marked the progress of the mystery float down Main Street. Wonder had returned to the tired earth. Some of the onlookers appeared so moved by what they saw that they were helped away in the arms of others. Buller, in his borrowed hussar's hat, carefully guided Daniel and his den down Main Street, past Charlie's place. "Hallo, Danny, that's da Bocco," past Chief Booze-in-the-Face, across the railroad tracks, and alongside the judge's reviewing stand, which stood at the bottom of Main Street Hill. "Whoa!" Buller shouted amidst the feline din, pulling the horses up abruptly. Statuesque Danny lurched a little, glancing ominously at Buller, but kept his balance. The startled judges peered and blinked at Danny in his cage, and then at each other, and then back at Danny. Wink Vivian's borrowed horses, Cub and Dick, chose this moment to start playfully biting each other. Buller bathed them in a gentle shower of stealthy profanity, but this only seemed to whet their appetites. So he quietly reached under his feet for his trusty dray stake. He'd fix 'em. Leaning forward with the upraised stake, he flailed Cub and Dick mightily across their buttocks. The effect was electrical. Cub and Dick whinnied and reared, and then suddenly plunged forward. With a splintering sigh, and pursuant to certain inevitable laws of motion, Daniel's lion's den broke away from the dray, tilted up in the air, hung there poised for a frozen moment, and then tumbled over onto Main Street. No two people agreed later on exactly how it happened. One thing was certain. Old Danny had described a perfect parabola as he crashed headfirst through the chicken wire cage onto Main Street. From then on, the picture was clouded by cats, clawing and spitting, meowing and screeching, the entire cageful of cats headed for the hole formed by the passage of Danny. There were white cats, black cats, orange cats, mottled cats, a veritable rainbow of cats, pouring from the cage like 4th of July pinwheels, and streaking in all directions like shafts of varicolored lights. Buller was abject. He ran back to Danny, but Danny had passed beyond all concern with the affairs of cats and men. Buller decently pulled the wolf pelt down from over Danny's ears. He tried to fan Danny with his hussar's hat. The harried judges of the parade hurried down off their stand to assist in the revival. One of them whispered to Buller. Buller knelt beside Danny and shook him. "Wake up, Danny, wake up! You won first prize, old man," Buller pleaded. Danny's eyelids fluttered open. "Where am I at?" he demanded, sitting up on Main Street. "Here," Buller joyfully ran on, dumping 3 large hams on Danny's lap. "You won the first prize." Danny contemplated the 3 hams on his lap. "I thought it belonged to be a live pig," he demanded. He had grown to covet the live pig. "What's these here hams fer?" "For the funniest goddamn float," Buller answered proudly. "They just told me. Boy, oh boy, they said the vote was you, Nan. Oh, hell, Danny, the sons of bitches all agreed." Number 18. Buller's New Suit. Buller had driven Wink Vivian's dray since early in June, thereby establishing an undisputed record at Hungry Hollow for continuous employment. He even began drinking less and saving money. The halo of respectability hovered uneasily over his head. It finally began to look as though he had forsaken the boys at Hungry Hollow. He seemed to avoid them when they came to town. Danny and the boys were perplexed and sore hurt. At length they constituted themselves an aggrieved delegation to come to town and find out if Buller had really resigned from Hungry Hollow. It was a Saturday night when Danny found him and accosted him on the subject in Charlie's place. "Look, Buller, what the hell's the matter? You ain't gone and fallen in love?" Danny demanded. "Nope," Buller said, hanging his head. "Got religion, then?" Danny said. "Nope," Buller said, avoiding Danny's eyes. "Ain't turned city slicker on us, have you?" "Nope," Buller said, intently studying the ceiling. "Then what's ailin' you? Why don't you come on home?" Danny peered closely at Buller. Buller plucked at the sleeve of Danny's plaid jumper and led him to Charlie's back room. They sat facing each other across the green poker table. Buller was opening and closing his mouth like a beached bass. "Confess," Danny said remorselessly. "Look, Danny," Buller was in labor. "Look, it's just this. I'm buying a new suit. 2 more weeks and it's paid for." "A new suit?" Danny exclaimed sharply, his eyelids fluttering. "Now don't get sore at me, Dan. I ain't had a whole new suit since I buried my ma." Buller sat blinking his little gray eyes. "Danny, I can't explain it clear. A fella's really got to own something good once in a while. I just got to get that there new suit." Danny rose, rubbing his nose with his thumb, sniffing. "Why, of course you do, Buller. I understand perfect. Why in hell didn't you tell me? Say, let's go and have a drink instead of mooning around back here. Hey, Charlie, set 'em up." The suit itself, a glorious double-breasted powder blue creation with patch pockets and a pinstripe, was still being molded over at Japhet Moylanen's tailor shop on Pearl Street. Japhet's Finnish cronies dropped in every day to remark his progress on the vast garment. Some of them had started to rename the little old tailor Japhet the Tent-Maker. In the meantime, Buller had quit the Chippewa house and had gone to live with his chum Chuck Woodlock, a local hero of 1,000 drunks, in Chuck's tar-paper shack over by the French church. This so that he could save more money for the suit and thus sooner be released from the drudgery of Wink Vivian's dray. For the first time in years, he had money in the bank. Well, not exactly in the bank, but in the iron safe in Charlie's place right next door to the bank, which was practically the same thing. Each Saturday night when Wink Vivian paid him off, Buller would march over to Charlie's place and hand Charlie a cash deposit on the suit. Obliging Charlie was always glad to help a friend, especially when that friend usually tarried and spent the rest of his week's pay over the battered mahogany bar. On the Saturday night before Halloween, Buller came bustling into Charlie's place with Chuck Woodlock and drew out all his money. The suit was finally paid for. Buller bought a round of drinks for the house. He then ostentatiously shook hands with Charlie like a departing diplomat, and he and Chuck went over to Japhet's tailor shop. Japhet had finished the suit and had it on display in the front window for passing pedestrians to pause and marvel at. "That's wonderful fit, Mr. Buller," Japhet exclaimed ecstatically in the tradition of tailors the world over, after Buller had wrestled himself into his new blue suit. "She fits you like a glove." Buller kept twisting and posturing before Japhet's swivel mirrors, beaming like an expectant young bridegroom. He somehow resembled the Aga Khan at an annual diamond weighing. He was enchanted by what he saw. "It's wonderful," he finally sighed, reluctantly turning away and counting out the money he owed Japhet. "You got $3.20 coming back," Japhet said, reaching toward his wooden till. "That's all right," Buller said airily, wheeling before the mirror again. "Keep the change, Japhet, keep the change." Buller was in no mood for fractions. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Buller. Do you want to take your old clothes now, or will you call for them some other days?" Buller looked disdainfully down at his soiled and crumpled dray clothes. "Hell, give 'em to the poor, Japhet," he said, grandly waving them away. "Here, give 'em to me. You niver ken all as sometimes tell." Thus spake Chuck Woodlock, the voice of experience, as he gathered up Buller's old clothes and wrapped them in a newspaper. "You never can allus tell what tomorrow will sometimes fetch." To say that Buller's adventures of that Saturday night achieved epic proportions would smack of understatement. It would have taken a hardy soul to follow his meteoric double-breasted course. That night Buller was Falstaff, Prince Hal, and Bet-A-Million Gates all rolled into one. He had at last become a gentleman, a man of the world. Accompanied by the faithful old family retainer, Chuck Woodlock, Buller managed to display his new suit in every saloon in town. It was a sensation. Toward midnight, he and his wavering man, Woodlock, devoured 2 great dripping steaks over at Urho Pentamake's Tip-Top Cafe. They next paid a social call on Big Annie and her girls, where the new suit practically stopped all professional activity. Somewhat later, Buller met his employer, Wink Vivian, back in Charlie's place. "Hello, Buller," Wink said, worriedly observing Buller's inflamed condition. "You plannin' to take the dray out Monday morning?" This unfortunate and poorly timed reference to such mundane things as employment caused Buller to draw himself up haughtily, carefully rebutton his tight-fitting coat, and suggest to poor Wink where he might promptly proceed to drive Cub and Dick, either together or in single file. Buller fixed Wink with his reddened eyes. "Mr. Vivian," he concluded with dignity, "I tender my resignation, effective immediately, sir. Come on, Chuck. I detect an odor of horses in here. Charlie, old boy, please wrap up couple of coarse old cordwood." Only another visit to the feminine comfort of Big Annie's could soothe Buller's ruffled feelings. At length, in the wee hours of Sunday morning, Rocco Pantalone drew up in front of Chuck Woodlock's shack in his old Cadillac taxicab. There he unceremoniously dumped Buller and his man Woodlock onto Chuck's creaking, brass-knobbed bedstead. Rocco diligently searched in the pockets of Buller's new suit for his fare. He finally found and fished out a solitary, wrinkled dollar bill. "Good night, Mr. Bull," Rocco called from the door. "Blah, blah," Buller answered, turning his face to the wall. Sunday was the eve of All Saints' Day, more often known as Halloween, and the youth of Chippewa scampered about the frosty, wind-blown streets all morning on reconnaissance tours for the coming mischief of the evening. A successful practice rock aimed at Chuck's door finally aroused the sorry pair around noontime. Buller and Chuck lay blinking at each other for minutes before either of them dared utter a word. "Wah!" Buller finally said. "Woof!" shivering Chuck answered. I'd give anything for a drink," Buller sighed. There was a long silence. Then, "How about pawning your new suit?" Chuck craftily suggested. By 2:00, Buller and Chuck, the former again clad in his old dray clothes, were hammering at the door of Japhet Moylanen's tailor shop. Buller was carrying a large bundle wrapped in newspaper. Japhet finally padded from the back room where he lived and admitted the quaking pair. "Look, Japhet," Buller got right down to cases, "I'm sick, sicker'n any man's got a right to be and live. If I don't have a drink soon, I'll up and die. Will you buy back my new suit for half price, will you, Japhet?" Buller eagerly thrust the bundle at Japhet. Japhet recoiled as though Buller were offering him a writhing cobra. "I knew for that," he sighed. "I just knew you would be back." Japhet was sorely distressed. "But, Buller, I can't do for that. Honest crossings my heart, I can't." "Why?" Buller demanded, aghast. "Look," Japhet made a frank appeal to reason. "Even for the half prices I would lose money." He held up 2 fingers. "You see, like a goddamn fool, I make really 2 suits for prices of 1 in the first places. That much cloth you using up." Buller and Chuck looked at each other incredulously. There was only one way out. The sacrifice must be made. They simply had to have whiskey. $5, then," Buller said resignedly. Japhet was sorry, but firm. "No, Buller. Use your common sense noodle. If you even give me that suit back, what place I can sell it? What regular kind men's can ever wear that goddamn tent? Tell me that." Japhet threw out his hands. Japhet's logic was devastating. Buller was cut to the quick. This was heaping insult on injury. And still there was no whiskey in sight. "Come on, Chuck, let's get out of this grasping old miser's dump." Buller turned at the door. "All right for you, Japhet," he pouted. "In the future, I'll take all my tailoring business over to Rosenthal. You'll be sorry." "I wish you would," Japhet answered, wearily drawing the shade and turning the key in the lock. Back at the cold shack, thirsty Buller and Chuck built a roaring fire in the cast-iron stove and boiled up a pot of coffee. Buller carefully shook out his wrinkled new suit and lovingly hung it up at the head of the brass bed. Then the two sat on the tumbled bed and drank their steaming coffee. "Hey there, Chuck!" Buller suddenly shouted. "You'll burn the goddamn joint down. Check the bloody stove." He pointed up at the glowing stovepipe, which was red-hot, clear up to where it went through the tar-paper ceiling. "No, she won't burn down," Chuck answered languidly. At this point he felt little concern over the future. "Anyway, I don't give a tinker's damn if she does. I'm figuring to clear out anyway. The whole bloody place ain't worth $5. To prove his point, he got up and threw several more chunks of coal stolen from the L.S.&C. railway onto the roaring fire. He glanced over at Buller. "Hey, what's up?" Chuck exclaimed. Buller was sitting on the bed, wide-eyed, nodding his head, lips pursed, wearing the beatific expression of a man seized with a celestial vision. "A fire," he kept repeating as though to himself, his eyes getting wider and wider with the wonder of it all. "Fire?" Chuck began. "We need money for whiskey, don't we?" Buller demanded tensely. "Sure, sure," Chuck agreed. "And we's both broke, ain't we?" Buller said. "There ain't none broker," Chuck glumly admitted. "Look," Buller said excitedly, "does the fire department still pay $8 for the first team of horses what shows up at the fire hall to haul the hose cart when the fire bell rings?" "Sure," Chuck said, "only it's raised to $10 now." "Spot cash?" Buller said. "Soon as you get back from the fire?" Buller licked his lips and winked at mystified Chuck. "Well," he went on slowly, "I still got the key for Wink Vivian's barn, where he keeps Cub and Dick." "Yes," Chuck said, faint streaks of dawn beginning to break. "And at 4 o'clock I could have 'em harnessed and all waitin' and ready behind the billboard next to the fire hall." Buller paused craftily. "Go on," Chuck whispered hoarsely. "And if a guy could find a real pal that'd turn in the fire alarm, say, let's see, from the alarm box at Doc Martin's corner up on Strawberry Hill?" Chuck was wordless before such genius. "Then by 5 o'clock we could be back here with the price for a supply of old cordwood to celebrate for performing our plain municipal duty." Buller was carried away. "Hell, I could even wear my new suit tonight." Chuck, still stricken dumb with delight, tossed some more coal on the blazing fire, so that everything would be snug and ship-shape when they returned for their party. "Come on," Buller called from the door. "We gotta get going." He reached over and smoothed out a wrinkle in his new suit, hanging from the head of the brass bedstead. Buller patted the suit tenderly. "Boy, oh boy, what a garment! What a day!" At 3:50, Buller was waiting with Cub and Dick fully harnessed and whipple-treed behind the billboard next to the fire hall. He kept his eyes glued to the clock in the bell tower. 10 more minutes, he whispered, moistening his lips. "Whoa there, Cub, Dick." At 3:55, Buller was whispering, "Just 5 minutes more," when the fire bell started clanging. Bong, dong, bong, 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 bong. "He's 5 minutes early," Buller muttered to himself, bringing down the leather reins across the rumps of the startled horses. "Get up, Cub, Dick. Come on, run like you never run before." Out from behind the billboard plunged Cub and Dick, the whipple-trees banging and clattering, with Buller making great elephantin bounds to keep up with them, all the time urging the frantic horses to even greater bursts of speed. The chariot race for the price of old cordwood was on. The tall doors of the fire hall stood open. Men were running up and down, snatching helmets and boots and rubber coats from hooks. Other men were sliding down brass poles. Buller's horses clattered wildly into the hose cart door. Lo! His was the first team. The old cordwood was in the bag. In the next doorway, the big new red hook and ladder truck was warming up, alternately sputtering and roaring. "Nice going, Buller. Hook 'em up," someone shouted in Buller's ear. Buller backed Cub and Dick around in front of the horse cart. "Gee there, Cub and Dick, Ha, a little. Now back. Easy there, cub. He quickly adjusted the tugs, tossed the reins up over the seat, and, puffing mightily, clambered up to the cushioned seat, where he grabbed the reins and vigorously clanged the footbell. Then, without another backward glance, he lashed out at Cub and Dick, who promptly catapulted from the fire hall, with a dozen or so startled firemen clinging to the sides of the rumbling hose cart. Clang, clang, clang went the footbell as Buller made a reeling turn north towards Doc Martin's house. "Get up, Cub, Dick," Buller shouted. "Don't worry, Doc, we'll be right there." Clang, clankety-clang. "Hey!" shouted Barney Langley, the fire chief, bolting wildly from the fire hall after Buller. "You're going the wrong bloody way! Hey, you bloody fool!" But Buller paid no heed, so intent was he on saving the threatened Martin home from flames. Clang, clang, clang. Buller was proudly seated, arms folded, on the hose cart drawn up in front of Dr. Martin's house. Several firemen were standing around on the Martin porch, talking with a perplexed Dr. Martin. "They ain't no fire around here," one of them shouted at Buller. "They ain't," Buller echoed in wide-eyed wonder, biting his lower lip and shaking his head. At this point, the town fire bell sounded a second alarm. Bong, 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 came drifting upon the crisp October air. The fireman left Dr. Martin standing on his porch and raced back to the hose cart. Some 10 minutes later, they were still standing around, noisily debating what they should do, when the fire chief's little red coupe squealed around Doc's corner. Mike Nolan, the chief of police, was sitting beside Barney Langley, the fire chief. Barney parked alongside Buller and slowly got out and put his foot up on the hub of the hose cart, squinting one eye up at Buller and slowly stroking his chin. "Look, Buller," the fire chief said with a sort of deadly calm, "would you mind just telling Mike and I what in hell you're doing up here? Who told you to come here in the first place? We was just wondering, that's all." Buller had had a rather full weekend, and the pace was beginning to tell. His face had gone the color of a red-brick schoolhouse. "Why, you got an alarm turned in for here, didn't you?" he inquired brightly. "To be sure, Buller," the fire chief affably agreed. "Just 2 minutes after you headed for here." Buller gulped and meditated. "Must have been just a prank. Mebbe some Halloween kids turned in a false alarm," he ventured politely. "I'm thinking they was goddamn big ones," Barney answered grimly, looking Buller straight in the eye. Buller swallowed and looked away. You mean, Barney, I went to the wrong fire?" Buller tried again. "Exactly," Barney continued to beam falsely. "The alarm you should have ought to answered was Chuck Woodlock's shack over by the French church." Buller swayed on his tall seat. He closed his eyes and quickly shook his head like a wet and discouraged St. Bernard. You put it out, of course?" he asked in a child's voice. "Yeah, we saved the lot. How in hell could we put it out with you gallivanting up here with all our goddamn hose?" "You mean you didn't save nothing? Not even nothing like a suit of clothes or nothing?" Buller was swaying badly again. "All we saved was Chuck Woodlock hisself. Guess he must have been half snaky. He kept trying to run in there to rescue something for a friend, he kept saying." Barney turned to the chief of police. "Well, Mike, enough of this clownin'. You heard it from Buller's own lips. Shall we take him over to jail now and get it over with?" Buller had turned from schoolhouse red to aquarium green. He weakly held up a perspiring fat hand. "I'll go quiet," he said in a small voice. "But just stand clear for a minute. I think I'm gonna be sick." Number 19. Old Rocking Chair. The first heavy snow had fallen, winter had settled upon the waiting, obedient northern earth. The November deer-hunting season was well advanced when Buller finished serving his 20-day sentence in the county jail at Iron Bay. He caught a ride to Chippewa on a logging truck. The wintry afternoon was beginning to wane when he finally walked into the camp at Hungry Hollow. Timmy was alone, seated at the oilcloth-covered table, preparing his precious fly rods for winter storage. Timmy looked up. "Hello, Buller," he said, turning again to his work. "Figuring to stay around for a while?" Buller had lost weight. There was a sad and hungry look about him. His old dray clothes hung about him loosely, giving him a curiously Lincoln-esque appearance. "I'm staying around," he said. Then after a pause, he casually asked, "Anything in the Mulligan kettle?" He glanced hungrily at the cook stove. "Help yourself, Buller," Timmy said, deftly putting a touch of varnish on a new silk winding. "And there's a new batch of swan's bread in the cupboard." Buller hurriedly dipped out a heaping plateful of vegetables and stewed rabbit from the big iron kettle. He sat at the table by Timmy and fell to eating like a famished wolf. Timmy glanced at him several times from under his brows. Buller was ready for another helping. "Where's the boys?" he asked from the stove as he dipped out another plateful. "Taconite and Swan are out cutting wood," Timmy answered. "Whew," Buller blew as he sopped up the last of his second helping with the heel of a loaf of bread. "Where's old Danny? He's all right, ain't he?" Timmy did not answer. "I say Danny's all right, ain't he?" Buller repeated anxiously. "Who?" "Oh, Danny." Timmy glanced up from his work abstractedly. "Hell, we ain't seen Danny since daybreak. He spotted old Rocking Chair this morning down by the Mulligan, from a distance. He came running back to camp for the 44 and took after him. He's been out tracking him ever since, I guess." "Betcha he don't get him," Buller said, judiciously pursing his lips and nodding. "Okay," Timmy said. "What'll we bet?" "Betcha a big drink of whiskey don't nail him." Buller was obviously motivated solely by a scientific interest in ballistics. "Betcha the drink right now, if I had a drink." "Betcha," Timmy said, grinning, moving quickly to Danny's latest hiding place and bringing out a quart of Hungry Hollow moonshine. Buller grabbed the bottle with shaking hands. Boy, oh boy, he was home again. They called him Old Rocking Chair. The great white-tailed buck was so old, as deer go, that he had become almost legendary to the boys of Hungry Hollow. 6 years had passed since Danny and the boys had first sighted this magnificent animal. It had been a cool October morning. Danny discovered him standing on the crest of the little birch ridge behind the camp, sniffing the crisp morning air, his wet muzzle and spreading rack of antlers glistening in the early autumn sunshine. One by one the boys had filed out of the camp to gaze at him. Swan came last in his stocking feet. Then the fabulous deer had scented Danny and the boys. He stood there for a frozen instant with questioning ears forward, first one and then the other. Then he blew twice, whew, tossing his great rack, wheeling, running easily and stiff-legged, disdainfully bouncing down into the swamp behind the ridge, his tall tail wig-wagging a white farewell. "Look at them horns," Danny had croaked. "Did you see them goddamn horns? Just like the rockers on my ma's old rocking chair. Yep, old rocking chair, that's his name." Danny suddenly glared at Swan's plastered blonde hair. "Sure, and if you hadn't smeared yourself all over with that goddamn she-bear grease, he wouldn't have smelt us." He grasped Swan's reluctant head in his two hands and took a deep whiff of Swan's latest scent. Danny dolefully shook his head. "Just like a two-bit whore," he muttered. After that, the boys hadn't sighted Old Rocking Chair for 2 seasons. They had about concluded that either some lucky hunter had got him or that he had taken his masculine charms to some other section of the peninsula. Then one morning Danny went down to the misty Big Dead Pool to try for an unsuspecting trout, and there stood Old Rocking Chair up to his belly on a sandbar in the middle of the river. He had blown again, splashing with great dignity to the opposite bank, shaking himself, impatiently stamping his right foreleg, blowing disgustedly once more, then indignantly tossing his great rack, which was still in velvet, and quietly moving into the protective cover of the woods. "I could 'a' hit him with a goddamn rock," Danny excitedly explained to the boys. Several more years had passed. It was the fall before, when Timmy had wired the Mulligan Swamp for sound, and Old Rocking Chair had almost knocked him down, that Danny and the boys concluded that the great deer led a charmed life. "His maw must have been a gypsy and his paw half ghost," Danny had solemnly announced at the time. Old Rocking Chair's tracks took Danny clear down across the shallow Mulligan, up the other side, skirting the road to town for nearly a mile, always keeping to the woods for cover. There was about 6 inches of damp snow, ideal for tracking. The deer seemed to be walking slowly. His great splayed hoofprints told Danny that there was something wrong with his right foreleg. "Mebbe he's hurt hisself, or else he's getting rheumatism like old Danny," Danny whispered to himself, holding the .44 ready, cautiously edging forward.